On this week's Vaticano, Pope Francis presides over a prayer vigil on the World Day of Prayer for Creation. We speak to the co-founder of a unique campaign. Some sisters from Michigan speak about the Year for Consecrated Life. And an in-depth look at the Pope's cathedral, Basilica in Rome. No, it is not St. Peter's. Keep watching. This is Vaticano.
For the first time ever, Pope Francis celebrated the World Day of Prayer for the Care of Creation in the Vatican. On the evening of September 1st, the ecumenical celebration took place in St. Peter's Basilica with thousands of faithful, priests, religious, bishops, and cardinals present.
Ti lodiamo, Padre, con tutte le...
Praise you, Lord, with all your creatures that came from your mighty hand. They belong to you, and they are signs of your power and your tenderness. May you be praised.
Colme della tua presenza e della tua tenerezza. Laudato si.
Those present heard readings from the book of Genesis that retold the story of the creation of man and his relation to the animals and the rest of the world, and the Gospel of Matthew that says not to worry about tomorrow, but to trust in God first. Afterwards, the preacher to the papal household, Father Raniero Cantalamessa, gave a homily on what dominion over creation really means.
Il dominio di Dio sulle creature non è certo.
The dominion of God over the creatures is not geared in his own interest, but in the interest of the creatures that he takes care of. There's a clear parallel. As God is the dominus, the Lord of man, so man needs to be the dominus, the Lord, of the rest of creation, for which it is responsible and it must protect. Man is created in the image and likeness of God, his caretaker, not of other human lords. The sense of dominance of man is explicit in the text when it says, "The Lord God took man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it."
After some chants, another prayer, and the final blessing, Pope Francis went to greet the representatives of the Eastern churches.
The first general audience of September took place on a cloudy St. Peter's Square. Pope Francis continues with his teaching on the family.
Queridos hermanos y hermanas, hoy abordamos...
Dear brothers and sisters, today we address the theme of the family as a transmitter of the faith. Both in his words and actions, the Lord often puts family ties as an example of our relationship with God. The wisdom carved in those family affections, which can neither be bought nor sold, is the best legacy of the family spirit. And God reveals himself. He wants to reveal himself through this language. On the other hand, faith and love of God purify familial affections of egoism and protect them from degradation. They open a new horizon which enables us to see beyond, to see all men as one family. In this way, one who does the will of God and lives in his love is able to see Jesus in the other and to be for him a true brother.
Jesús en el otro y de ser para él un verdadero hermano.
Previously, on Sunday, the Pope prayed the Angelus from the window of the papal palace, explaining the Gospel of Sunday, which presented a dispute between Jesus and some Pharisees and scribes, explaining that precepts are the external expression of their inner disposition.
Exterior expressions are the consequence of what we have decided in our hearts, and not the other way around. With exterior expressions, if the heart doesn't change, we are not true Christians. The border between good and evil does not lie outside of us, but is rather within us, in our conscience. We can ask ourselves, where is my heart? Jesus said, your treasure is where your heart is. What is my treasure? Is it Jesus and his doctrine? My heart is good, or my treasure is another thing. Thus, it is the heart that we must purify and convert. Without a purified heart, we can never have truly clean hands, and lips that speak sincere words of love, mercy, and forgiveness.
Che pronunciano misericordia, perdono.
The Pope held a minute of silence for refugees that died in a truck in Austria.
Purtroppo, anche nei giorni scorsi,
Lamentably, as well, in recent days, numerous immigrants have lost their lives in their terrible journeys. For all these brothers and sisters, I pray and I invite you to pray. Let us pray in silence for immigrants who suffer and for those who have lost their lives.
e per quelli che hanno perso la vita.
Pop Up Pope is one of the many communication campaigns that have popped up before the papal trip to the US. Krista Scalise of Philadelphia is a co-founder of the project that aims to build a bit of community around a cardboard cutout.
If we could utilize the cardboard image of the Pope on the street to engage people in conversation, if they're interested in coming and getting a photo, talking with us, and it gives them a happy moment because we have an image of the happy, smiling Pope, engages them in some sort of conversation. If the conversation then goes in a direction of something that's faith-based, wonderful. My friend Paul is a catechist and can engage in those conversations. On the other hand, we thought that if it gives us the opportunity as something that's new to engage somebody that might not normally be drawn to a cardboard image of a Pope, gives us the chance to engage them in conversation and give us an opportunity to offer them some personal hope. So we have sort of the curiosity seekers, the, let's say, tourists, the people that love Pope Francis, and other people that will just be drawn in that are probably homeless, or are homeless, or drug addicted, or having some serious mental health issues. For me, those are the best encounters, because it's those people that might, and I don't know for sure, they have lost hope, they might not believe in God, they might not have any faith, but to have an encounter with another human being that says, I see you, I recognize you.
Krista is originally from Philadelphia area, but she currently lives in Wilmington, Delaware. But she was actually inspired to take to the streets there after an encounter with the successor of Peter at a general audience in Rome.
Our concept is we want to be able to engage with people right there on the spot and have a conversation with them. Pray with them if that goes there. We also bring with us oftentimes prayer quotes, inspirational quotes. Sometimes they're Bible quotes, sometimes they're not. You know, our intention isn't to proselytize and take out a Bible and say, you have to believe this. It's about connecting and love and mercy. That's really what it's about for us. If being in the presence of Pope Francis is 1/1,000,000th of what it was like for the apostles to be in Jesus' presence, I get it. I get it. You could tell just being in his presence, this is a holy man, and this is someone who really cares about people. And I left that day going, I want to bring this back home. So then as soon as I got back to Philly, like a week, 2 weeks later, the Pope is coming. I was like, this is it. This is it. And then, you know, seeing the pictures from the Philippines, it's like, we have to bring this here. Philly needs Pope Francis. We need him desperately.
And that's why they've brought him to the streets already in the months leading up to the visit.
The first public church of Christianity in the Roman Empire. The seat of the Bishop of Rome, the Pope. The oldest basilica in the West. St. John Lateran towers above the ancient walls of Rome with its splendorous facade, an enormous relic and ultimately a sign of victory over paganism.
First of all, what's important about this church is more than just Rome. It's the first legally built Christian church in the world. It's the first time the Christians actually got to have a piece of property, design a church, and build it for themselves instead of accommodating in some house church. Except the placement of the church, well, it isn't exactly in the heart of town. the circumstances of the building of the church that we know today at St. John Lateran began with Constantine. Constantine, who after the victory of the Milvian Bridge against the contender for the rule of Rome, Maxentius, he legalized Christianity in 313, and then he proceeded to build the first 6 Christian churches. Now, the other churches were built outside the walls on top of the tombs of martyrs. But Constantine wanted to give the Christians one space within the city walls. But the only option he had, because certainly the city of Rome was still very hostile to Christianity, the only option he has was to give his own property, which is what this is. This area, the Lateran, which comes from the names of the previous owners of this property, is a property which sits hard by the city walls, however. So it's sort of like a message to the Christians, okay, you can come in, but please stay in the foyer because we don't want you in the living room. And it will take 200 years for the Christians to get in the door into the heart of the city. So this church, it's a great step forward. It's the first step into the urban fabric of Rome, but at the same time, it's still a first step with many more to go.
The Lateran is on the outer edge of the center of Rome, but located close to 2 other monumental edifices, both of importance for Catholics in remembrance of Christ's suffering and resurrection.
Well, the location of the Lateran, as we call it today, between this series of other properties belonging to Constantine. One a little bit further down the way was where his mother, the Dowager Empress Helena, used to live. It was known as the Caesarian Palace, but after Helena's pilgrimage to the Holy Land, where she found the true cross and a series of other relics, she brought those things back to her home, the Caesarian Palace, which eventually would become the Church of Holy Cross. And for Christians, it's a space here in Rome where we can relive the events of Christ's Passion. You can climb up to this chapel and be before the relics of Christ's Passion. So on one hand, this is kind of like the Church of the Holy Cross is kind of like being present at Jerusalem at the time of the Passion. Then the other piece of property has to do with the extension of this palace. This was the home of the popes for 1,000 years. This is the Cathedral of Rome. You always hear people refer to St. Peter's as the cathedral. As a matter of fact, some people just refer willy-nilly to any big church as a cathedral, but a cathedral can only be one. It's the seat of the bishop. And this church, the Church of the Lateran, is the seat of the Bishop of Rome because it was the first church built and because it was the home of the papacy for 1,000 years. And as the papacy began to expand and organize its administration buildings, its reception buildings, this whole area that you see kind of neatly arranged today was actually one giant outgrowth of palaces. And one of the more important spaces in the palace was the Pope's private chapel, today known as the Sancta Sanctorum, which is immediately next to the Church of St. John Lateran, which features the famous holy stairs, the stairs that, according to tradition, Christ climbed to be judged by Pontius Pilate.
The church is practically a gigantic reliquary in which treasures have been kept for centuries.
This church is a repository of extraordinary relics. I mean, it was the Pope's house for 1,000 years. The Pope actually put together quite a collection of relics. His collection of relics was primarily kept in the Sancta Sanctorum, in this great personal chapel that he kept at the top of the so-called holy stairs. The collection was so significant that the list of what was in that relic collection was written in mosaic, and that mosaic list is still by the sacristy today. And it contained many, many, many special things. One of the more important developments in this church is when the name was changed from Christ the Savior to the Johns in the Lateran. As you move closer to the altar, you move closer to the more and more important relics. So there's the shrine to John the Baptist, and you look up to a reliquary that traditionally contains fragments of the skull of St. Peter and St. Paul, because as the Cathedral of Rome, it brings together both the apostles in the auctoritas of the Pope. And then it also has what was considered the centerpiece of the relics of the Pope. They brought from the Scala Sancta, or from the Sancta Sanctorum, to this church a fragment of the table of the Last Supper when they built in a new Blessed Sacrament chapel and placed it up in the Blessed Sacrament chapel. So you're surrounded by these amazing testimonies of the origin of the Eucharist. Peter's altar, the wooden table that he used when he was Bishop of Rome, englobed in the altar, the remains of the skulls of people. You're englobed in the history of the church, even though you may be standing in what is very clearly what looks to be a modern building.
Being the oldest church, it has undergone multiple facelifts over the century. Each era left its mark.
So when we look at these different ages of decoration, we see in them all these different moments that the church has experienced. So you look at the floors, the cosmatesque floors, which are put in the 12th century. You look at the canopy. The canopy is from the 14th century. You look at the ceilings were put up right after the church had taken a rather serious beating during the Reformation, these gold and blue ceilings with the images of Peter and Paul. And then as the 17th century begins to get moving, they decide to redo, the Jubilee year of 1650, they were going to redo the interior of the church, lining the nave with these magnificent Baroque images of the apostles. And so you'll find them standing in these incredibly dramatic positions, as St. Bartholomew holding his own skin, a reminder of the number of martyrs that are taking place in this turbulent period of the 16th and 17th century. There he is holding his own skin. Matthew on the other side standing on a bag of gold, careless of wealth because he's the tax collector who gave everything up, with one little coin poised in midair, almost as if to ask us, could you do the same thing? He's got those nice overdeveloped forearms from all that gospel writing. And then you move a little bit further down the nave, and what do you see halfway down the nave? You see an arm sticking out from one of the niches, a finger pointing towards the altar. And what has to be, at least in my opinion, the most amazing thing about the decoration of those apostles, that recognition that in every single person's life journey, which is what a nave of a church is, the nave is our journey, right? In every single person's faith journey, there comes a moment when you falter. And remember that those statues were made at the age of Descartes, when doubt became just part of the world vocabulary. So everybody has a moment when he or she falters. So who is the apostle who points you the rest of the way? St. Thomas, the famous doubting Thomas, reaches out, guides us. And what an amazing way in this church to recreate the journey that people make in life, a reminder to all of us that, things seem to come to a crashing halt. We can build it up anew, make it beautiful in a new way. This church really is one of the greatest expressions of the church. One of the things about being the first church that the Christians will actually be able to build is that it's a chance for them in a city that was marked by pagan temples or little pagan cult cells, all officially sanctioned religions. It was a chance for the Christians to make their presence felt. I think one of the things that's a little surprising is to come up with such a grand and obviously modern exterior, because the original exterior, as it was built by the Christians, was a simple brick facade. And so the Christians at the time in the 4th century, one of the very first things they did was to counter the expression of the Roman temples, where all the beauty is on the outside and then the interiors were sort of these dark windowless cells. The Christians made a point of inverting that. The exterior part of the building is simple. The interior part of the building, as described to us, was magnificent. And so it's again a way of reflecting the Christian life, or even Christ himself, humble on the exterior, but glorious on the interior. As you can see, in the 1730s, they replaced the facade with something much more dashing. That has to do with the Grand Tour. And when it was now the pilgrims who would walk this way looking for ancient devotion were flanked by the 18th, 19th century sophisticates who were really just looking down at a place like this as some ancient vestige of some remote superstition. And so they rebuilt a facade that would look new and ready to face a modern age. It was so successful that the Grand Tourists went home and they designed all their bank buildings to look like that. So obviously it had some character they enjoyed. And then as you walk into the church, what's the second message? The church has been rebuilt from the ground up a dozen times. But you know what's original? The size. And I think everybody who walks into the Lateran is always amazed, like, wow, this is big. Because the Christians built for size. Not an exclusive religion where you stand outside and the God is inside. Not some tiny little cult cell where 40 people will fit. But a church big enough to welcome everybody. That inclusiveness of the Christian religion was the very first thing we tried to express in our churches.
On the feast of the Presentation of the Lord earlier this year, Pope Francis officially opened the year for consecrated life. Though somewhat overshadowed by the news of the Synod and the extraordinary year of mercy, this year is giving special recognition to the backbone of the Church in the world, religious men and women. On multiple occasions, Pope Francis has celebrated this event, as this Mass on April 26th, as well as his meeting with thousands of men and women religious from Rome at the Vatican's Paul VI Hall on Saturday, May 16, 2015. These Mercy Sisters have been following the events from Rome. They run the U.S. Bishop's Office for United States visitors to the Vatican here.
So our sisters help in the what we call the visitor's office, and they help American pilgrims obtain tickets for the papal events, which are free and open to everyone, but you need to have a ticket. So it involves greeting pilgrims who come to pick up their tickets, answering a lot of emails. And so our sisters help in various ways. Some of us are more involved than others in the visitor's office because some of us are also studying.
I think, speaking of the fruits, that's been one of the greatest fruits, I think, of this apostolate. Welcoming the pilgrims and also helping them, instructing them about what to expect, but also making the sacrament of reconciliation available to them. And I think, and that's something that we've begun to do. I'm not sure when we started in the last few years, but it has been really a wonderful, wonderful thing. So, yeah, I think that's one of the greatest fruits of this work.
For Sister Mary and her sisters, the year for consecrated life has a special meaning.
We've thought of this year as an opportunity to reflect on religious life. I know one of the things our community has done is to try to invite more people to take the opportunity to come and pray with us at some of our holy hours, which is a central part of our life, and to spend some time with the sisters.
The consecrated life is a sign of His presence on earth. We live our vows so that when people see us, they think of God and they think of Jesus and they think of the Church. And so that's a tremendous privilege.
A clear, visible property of many religious women is the habit. The Church knows many types and colors of habits. The Sisters of Mercy see much meaning in the habit.
One thing is it's an aspect of poverty, so we don't have to worry about buying clothes, a wardrobe. You don't have to think about what you're going to wear or that day, you just know. It's also, more importantly, it's a symbol of our total consecration to God. But it's really a symbol of the total consecration of the sister to God, and various symbols. So like we wear our Mercy Cross for our community. Every community has a different habit, obviously, but for us, our Mercy Cross is important as a symbol of God's mercy and man's misery, and the sister being the convergence point of that through her life.
It's to be a visible sign of the love of Christ and of the woman's consecration to God. So as a visible sign, the religious habit should say a number of things both to the sister herself and to those who see her. So I can just give you some concrete examples. Would be that when I wear the religious habit, sometimes I'm reminded and even surprised about its meaning by the people that approach me and assume that when they see me, they can find in me someone who's trustworthy, someone that they will receive prayers from. Very often, every day, people come up to me and say, I have this problem in my life. Would you please pray for me? I have someone sick in my life. Or they simply feel that I'll be a listening ear for them. So the habit is a visible sign of the love of God, but it's also, I have found, a great responsibility and a reminder to me, the responsibility to be what I show that I am, to be the sign that I'm supposed to be, so that I am what people expect me to be when they approach me, that I am approachable, that I will take their intentions to prayer. So it's a sign of the love of God.
Pope Francis, in his letter to consecrated and religious for the year, calls for a greater awareness and a promotion of vocations to the religious life. From personal experience, some words of advice from Sister Anna Marie as young people discern their own vocations.
The first thing I would say is don't be afraid. There's so much to discover. So the first thing is Are you praying? Are you open? Are you listening to what the Lord has to say to you? And then don't be afraid. Visit the sisters, get to know them, get to know certain communities, and you'll find that we're real people. And we love our life, we love the Lord, and it's a joyful life.
In the beginning of 2016, a theological symposium on religious life is planned that will end the year with a closing Mass on World Day of Consecrated Life, February 2nd